Hello, MGTOWs. Hello, men. I wanted to take a look today at two critical studies that were done in 1966, and I think the other one was done in right around 1953 and 1958. We're looking at two studies of two different groups of people. One study, the first study, and we know what it is. Most of us have heard the story. It's Huffling's hospital experiment, where Huffling created a more realistic study of obedience than Milgram's by carrying out a field study of nurses who were unaware they were involved in an experiment. The other study was very interesting. It's called the Robbers Cave experiment. It's Mufar Sheriff. Musa Sheriff conducted a realistic conflict theory study, and the conflict theory study was on two groups of boys of 20. It was done in Robbers Cave. That's where the name comes from. It was a campground, I guess. The field. Let's explain a little bit. I don't want to go into the studies. Actually, what I want to do is go into the perception of the authority officials at that point, and the perception of the ethics that they used. And we know with the Huffling's hospital experiments in 1966 that there was quite a bit of outrage with it. The results were 21 of 22 nurses were easily influenced into carrying out orders, and we knew that was just a continuation of Milgram's experiment. The critical evaluation of that is the strength of the study is that it has a high level of ecological validity due to the fact it was conducted in a real-life experiment or environment. However, the study broke ethical guidelines of deception, as neither of the doctors were real. But I thought, wow, that's not a very good description, because both Milgram's and Huffling were doctors underneath a veil of deceit, but they were still both doctors. And when we look at the Robbers Cave experiment is where it becomes very explicit in what happened. We look at the critical evaluation of the Robbers Cave experiment, and the conflict, we're looking at conflict all over the world, and the simple examination of the conflict with competitors. And these two groups, they stirred the pot in the conflict, and in this conflict with the two groups of boys, the two groups of boys went into violence, and they went into mental issues that could have been long-term mental issues with the boy. The ethical issues are considered that the participants were deceived the same way that in the Milgram's or the Huffling experiments, they were deceived in the aim to study the participants. They lacked the protection of physical and psychological harm that could have injured these boys for the rest of their life, nor the results were generalized in real life. And they said, they were a group of 12-year-old middle-class white boys, and what could we learn from that? And so we look at these two conflicting ideas, and I have to say to myself, on one end, the ethical issues was the nurses were deceived, and somehow that was wrong. On the other end, when looking at 12-year-old boys, they say, well, it was kind of the norm that boys compete and fight, and they participate in psychological harm between themselves. And the samples were both biased, and we know that, and the samples were both done under the observation of physicians, doctors, psychologists. But the psychologists and the physicians never learned anything about the social norms that were put in place, and never looked at neither one in comparison of both these experiments, and a lot of experiments that were done on that time. We have these great examples, and we can put all these experiments on a bar of, say, or a graph chart of, say, what was okay to do the females and what was breaking the ethical standards. And at that time, breaking the ethical standards was to deceive them somehow. And on the other experiment, it was okay, and nobody went to jail, that they took a bunch of boys and tortured them and provided stress to the boys, mental stress, and even physical harm, and nobody thought to think about that. And it's just a little great example of how society in the whole thinks about boys and men. You know, kick the boys in their nuts, it's okay. Throw rocks at boys, it's okay. And when we think about this, has society changed for the better for boys and men? No, it hasn't. It's gotten much worse. It's so much worse to insult a woman or insult a person on the internet. But boys, let's kick them in the balls. Let's throw rocks at boys. Let's torture boys. That's where society never learned a lesson from any of these, and especially the doctors and the nurses and the professionals that refuse to do the studies of the studies and refuse to put them all together in a group and look at what groups were affected by what studies. No, they'll never see it that way, because with that you would have to say boys and men are simply treated worse. Thanks a lot, man. You guys take care.